What tool brand is the best value for money? Not who is the cheapest or who is the most powerful, but who provides you the most amount of torque force per dollar that you spend. Well, today I'm going to be attempting to answer this question through a bit of a dorky analysis. And at the end of this video, I'm going to recommend the ideal ecosystem depending on which of four budget classes that you fit into. And so those four categories being the hobbyist, then the semi-professional, then the tradie with a budget, and then the tradie with a very open budget. And I did this by looking at the price to power ratios for many common tools that we find in our sheds. And yes, I know there are other factors that affect price as far as ergonomic design, how long the warranty is, and the materials that go into the tools. But I still figured that the power to cost ratios will give us a bit of a rough, if not precise idea of where all the tool brands sit as far as value for money. And so I did this analysis by lining up tools of very similar performance specs and then looked at the cost. And the tools in particular that I looked at were the hammer drill, the impact driver, the 125mm angle grinder, and 36 volt 44 centimeter lawnmower. Then on top of that as well, I looked at the costings for both the battery recharges and also the cost of a 5 amp hour battery for all of these brands. And the 8 brands that I'm going to be analyzing today are Makita, Bosch Blue, DeWalt, Ozito, Ryobi, Milwaukee, Metabo, and Hikoki. Oh, and of course, AEG. There can be a very reasonable criticism that can be made as to say that how do we trust the advertised torque power, as there is no regulatory body to basically call out or fine companies for inflating their performance. Well, I do believe that there is something that's keeping them honest, and that is the competition. And as an example, Makita, DeWalt, and Milwaukee have gotten into some pretty serious disputes in the United States, basically calling each other out for inflating their torque powers. And although in Australia there hasn't been that much controversy regarding this, I do believe that if any company were to massively inflate their torque power, that the other companies would call them out pretty quickly and expose them for it. And so, although there may be minor exaggerations as far as the advertised torque powers, I do believe it would be within a pretty small margin of error. And just before I get into the results, I'd like to thank my sponsor. No, just kidding, I'm too small to have sponsors. Anyway, let's actually get into the results. And the first result that I'll be talking about will be the hammer drill. The y-axis will be torque force, and if you don't know what torque force is, it basically means spinny force or spitty power, whereas the x-axis will be cost. And so I've tried to make all the dots to reflect the color of what the brand uses. I mean, for example, you got fluoro green, which is Ryobi, and you'll notice that there's two red ones here too. And so the darker red is Ozito and the lighter red is Milwaukee. But I can appreciate that looked a little bit complicated. So what I did was I actually included a trend line in the middle here. And so a more simple way to look at this is if the company that you're considering is sitting above the trend line, it's good value for money. And if it's sitting below the trend line, it's not as competitive as far as value. And so please take a moment to look at and reflect on these results. Hikoki are a bit of a standout. And Ryobi and Milwaukee have presented themselves as pretty good value here as well. And right now, I bet a few of you, not all of you, but a few of you are thinking, but hang on, aren't there multiple versions of the tool with just different power ratings from the same brands? And so have I accounted for this? Just as an example, I'll put on the second Ozito drill, and this drill is 1/3 more expensive and also 1/3 more powerful. And so if I plot this here as well, although it sits in a different position on the graph, the distance above the trend line is virtually identical. And so with this being primarily an analysis about value for money, it doesn't really change the big picture. And so with moving forward, every company is just going to have one representative for every class of tool. And now it's time to move to the 18 volt impact driver. And so with looking at this trend line, Ryobi are the furthest above the trend line. And also AEG and Bosch presented themselves as pretty good value here as well. And Milwaukee is basically on the line itself, and unfortunately everyone else has fallen below the trend line here. So with that, we'll now move on to the 125mm angle grinder. And just before I get into the results of the angle grinder, I had to make a bit of a concession in regards to analyzing the angle grinder and also apply the same concession for the next category being the mowers. And that being is that the majority of the tool companies do not advertise the power that comes out of these tools. Then pretty much the only consistent metric that all of them put out in the marketing was their RPM. And I know RPM does not actually translate into real torque power. I thought I'd give it a go. And the tool brands actually lined up where you'd expect them to as far as where on the scale they should be for power. I still went ahead with this analysis using RPM, even though it's not an ideal metric. And so if you want to skip this section and the mower section, I won't be offended. But if you don't want to skip it, well, let's get into it. And so Hikoki, Milwaukee, and Ozito did really well. And meanwhile, Ryobi and Metabo were just over the trend line. Now, let's move on to the mowers. And now all of these mowers have a 50-litre catch, and they'll cut between 38 to 46 centimeters, and they all are 36 volts. And I had to do some adjustments here because unfortunately I could not find an identical package for all the brand's lawnmowers. I mean, for example, some would sell the mower by itself, whereas other companies would only sell the mower with a recharger and certain types of batteries. And so I decided to settle with the model to say, what would the mower, along with a double battery recharger, along with two 5 amp hour batteries cost? And so, say for example, there's a package that had 8 amp hour batteries, I'll deduct the cost of two 8 amp hour batteries, and then add on the cost of two 5 amp hour batteries. And so I had to do minor adjustments, all of these, to get to these results. And going into the mower results, Metabo is the standout winner here, with Ryobi and Makita both presenting themselves as pretty good value as well. And this is the first time that I've actually seen Ozito actually struggle for value for money. And this actually really hurts for me to see because I actually have this exact mower. And so that's the mower. And now let's move on to the batteries and the battery recharges. And as per usual, I've had to do some minor adjustments. Like for example, Ozito do 5.2 amp hour batteries and Metabo do 5.5 amp hour batteries. And so in those cases, I basically had to divide it by 5.2 or 5.5 and multiply it by 5, just to give it a fair price comparison to all the other companies that just do straight 5 amp hour batteries. And before anyone mentions this in the comments about the quality of the battery and different battery chemistries and etc., well, I can say that personally, I'm using the cheapest battery, which is Ozito, and I've had some of these batteries for over 6 years, and I've run them to dead empty several times. I've run them in temperatures that are over 45 degrees, and they're still performing. So even the cheapest batteries tend to be performing over time. So in my mind, a 5 amp hour battery is a 5 amp hour battery. And the same can be said about the recharges. I mean, some recharges kill your battery while they're recharging it, some fast charge, some do this, some do that. But at the end of the day, if we've been brutally honest, we just want it to recharge our batteries. I mean, how quickly we do it and how fancy they recharge the batteries, it isn't really a factor if we're being brutally honest. Yeah, and so anyway, I'll get straight into the results now. And so these orange lines here are the cost of the recharger, and the blue lines are the cost of the 5 amp hour battery. Now, Ozito wins this one, and by quite a considerable margin. And then you get AEG, Ryobi, Milwaukee, DeWalt, and Metabo with all pretty respectable results here as well. Now, I can appreciate that I have given a bit of information overload, so now at the conclusion of this video, I just want to give a bit of a summary for what I think could be the ideal tool ecosystem, depending on one of 4 levels of that you could be as far as using a tool. And so the 4 levels is that on the bottom you have the hobbyist, which is the category I personally fall into. Then the next level up, I have the part-time user. And then the category above it, I have the budget-conscious professional. And then for the top category, I've got the money isn't really an object professional. And so first, let's talk about the category that I belong to, the hobbyist. And so who and what is a hobbyist, and are you a hobbyist? Well, you fit into this category if you're not a professional tradie. The majority of the taskings that you do with your tools do not really go too far out of the ordinary. And so I think it's going to be pretty obvious what tool brand I'm going to say here, and that's going to be the tool brand that I've settled with, and that being Ozito. And yes, Ozito doesn't sit as far above the value for money trend line as far as certain other tool brands, which I'll talk about later. But Ozito make a point of not charging you for torque power that you'll never realistically need. And so as far as the torque power that you do actually realistically need as a hobbyist, Ozito is by far the best value for money. Alright, so now I'll move on to the second of the 4 categories, and that is the not quite a professional tradie, but you do use your tools on a regular basis. So an example of this could be, say, a property manager caretaker. Well, if this is you, in my analysis I've just performed here, I'd say Ryobi is the best value for money. And I say this because they're pretty much always the second cheapest behind Ozito in pretty much every category, but they're the only tool brand in my entire analysis that actually sat above the value for money trend line across every single tool that I looked at. Alright, so now I'll move on to the third of the 4 categories, and that is a professional tradie, but you are somewhat budget conscious. And so for this category, before actually starting my analysis, I was expecting the result for this to be, say, AEG, Makita, or DeWalt, or even Bosch Blue. But after performing this analysis, I was very surprised to see that Ryobi actually kind of wins this category as well. And I know they have a bit of a professional tradies stigma against them as far as no professional real trader uses them and etc. etc. But when you're actually looking at the raw power, they actually are in the same league as these professional tool brands. And in some cases, they're actually more powerful. Now, with that being said, although I'm giving Ryobi the win for this category as well, I'd say that they only did just pip AEG in DeWalt. And so if for whatever reason you don't want to go for Obi because you're worried about how your workmates will treat you or whatever, when AEG and DeWalt are both perfectly good results as well. And the differences between these three brands as far as value for money, the differences are negligible. Negligible. And now we'll get into the ultra extreme power category, where we basically talk about where the budget is reasonably open, but you don't want to be taken for a ride either. And so in this category, there are no surprises. It's obviously Milwaukee. But with that being said, both Metabo and Hikoki are both very good choices as well. Now, Milwaukee are the Lamborghini of tools, where they provide an amount of power that no realistic normal person would need apart from people in very unique circumstances. And obviously there are some tradies that do actually need that extreme unique once-off power. But if Milwaukee are the Lamborghini of tool brands, I'd say that Hikoki are the Ferrari, and Hikoki are slightly better value for money than Milwaukee as well. Hikoki is still developing their ecosystem and they don't quite have the variety of tools that Milwaukee has. But if you've looked at the range and you've noticed that Hikoki have every tool that you could ever potentially need, I'd say Hikoki is a very good choice as well. And what about Metabo? Because Metabo actually outperformed Hikoki and Milwaukee in some categories, so why not say Metabo? Well, yes, it is true that in certain categories, Metabo were either first, second, or third. However, in other categories for the tools, they're basically sitting in the pack of all the mid-tier tool brands. And so, whilst Metabo dominate in certain categories and not so much in other categories, Hikoki and Milwaukee seem to dominate in every category that they're in. So that's the only reason why I'm not saying Metabo as well. And so Metabo can still be a good choice if you're in a similar boat to picking Hikoki, where you have a look at the particular tools that you need and it does perform well in this analysis. Well then, yeah, there's nothing wrong with picking Metabo. It's a great choice as well. And so those are the picks out of my analysis for the four categories. And now some of you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned Makita, I haven't mentioned Bosch Blue. Well, these tool brands do have their value as well, but it's just not in the power to price ratios. And the values can be found in metrics that are a little bit harder to put into numbers. I mean, for example, good luck finding data on how long a tool lasts before it breaks. I see so many Makita tools that are out there that seem to be 15 years old or above, and how do you put that into a chart? How do you put that, and how do you compare that to other brands? It's something that's not really realistic. But anyway, I really hope that this analysis has helped you in deciding what tool ecosystem that you want to settle in. And if you're still struggling, there's another approach that you can take that is a little bit different to settling on one ecosystem, and that's the hybrid approach, where, say if you're new to a trade and you're not really sure what tools you're going to need on a regular basis, you can start off with either Ozita or Ryobi, and then just happily work away with it. And then when you find that you're caught in a situation where the tool's not powerful enough or it breaks too easily, well then for that tool and that tool alone, or then you use either a Hikoki or a Milwaukee. And you have two battery ecosystems. And so for your simple jobs where you only need simple tools, you have the cheap tools. And then for those specialist tools that you use on a regular basis that you're really rough with, or then you have the high quality tools as well. And the obvious downside of this approach is that you have to carry two tool ecosystems. But you're also getting the best of both worlds as well.